Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Goodbye, Mr. Chips. Written by James Hilton. Chapter 6. Read by Muhammad Afzal for second year students. There had followed then a time of such happiness that Chips, remembering it long afterwards, hardly believed it could ever have happened before or since in the world. For his marriage was a triumphant success. Catherine conquered Brookfield as she had conquered Chips. She was immensely popular with boys and masters alike. Even the wives of the masters, tempted at first to be jealous of someone so young and lovely, could not long resist her charms. But most remarkable of all was the changes she made in Chips. Till his marriage, he had been a dry and rather neutral sort of person, liked and thought well of by Brookfield in general, but not of the stuff that makes for great popularity or that stirs great affection. He had been at Brookfield for over a quarter of a century, long enough to have established himself as a decent fellow and a hard worker, but just too long for anyone to believe him capable of ever being much more. He had, in fact, already begun to sink into that creeping dry rot of pedagogy that is the worst and ultimate pitfall for the profession. Giving the same lessons year after year had formed a groove into which the other affairs of his life adjusted themselves with insidious ease. He worked well, he was conscientious, he was a fixture that gave service, satisfaction, confidence, everything except inspiration. And then came this astonishing girl wife whom nobody had expected, least of all Chips himself. She made him, to all appearances, a new man, though most of the newness was really a warming to life of things that were old, imprisoned, and unguessed. His eyes gained sparkle, his mind, which was adequately, if not brilliantly equipped, began to move more adventurously. The one thing he had always had, a sense of humor, blossomed into a sudden richness to which his years lent maturity. He began to feel a greater strength. His discipline improved to a point at which it could become, in a sense, less rigid. He became more popular. When he had first come to Brookfield, he had aimed to be loved, honored, and obeyed, but obeyed at any rate. Obedience he had secured, and honor had been granted him, but only now came love. The sudden love of boys for a man who was kind without being soft, who understood them well enough but not too much, and whose private happiness linked him with their own. He began to make little jokes, the sort that schoolboys like, mnemonics and puns that raised laughs and at the same time imprinted something in the mind. There was one that never failed to please, though it was only a sample of many others. Whenever his Roman history forms came to deal with the lex canolia, the law that permitted patricians to marry plebeians, Chips used to add, so that, you see, if Miss Plebs wanted Mr. Patrician to marry her and he said he couldn't, she probably replied, oh yes, you can, you liar. Roars of laughter. And Catherine broadened his views and opinions, also giving him an outlook far beyond the roofs and turrets of Brookfield, so that he saw his country as something deep and gracious to which Brookfield was but one of the many feeding streams. She had a cleverer brain than his, and he could not confute her ideas even if and when he disagreed with them. He remained, for instance, a conservative in politics despite all her radical socialist talk. But even where he did not accept, he absorbed. Her young idealism worked upon his maturity to produce an amalgam very gentle and wise. Sometimes she persuaded him completely. Brookfield, for example, ran a mission in East London to which boys and parents contributed generously with money but rarely with personal contact. It was Catherine who suggested that a team from the mission should come up to Brookfield and play one of the school's 11 at soccer. The idea was so revolutionary that from anyone but Catherine it could not have survived its first frosty reception. To introduce a group of slum boys to the serene environment of better class youngsters seemed at first a wanton stirring of all kinds of things that had better be left untouched. The whole staff was against it, and the school, if its opinion could have been taken, was probably against it too. Everyone was certain that the East End lads would be hooligans, or else they would be made to feel uncomfortable anyhow. There would be incidents, and everyone would be confused and upset. Yet Catherine persisted. Chips, she said, they are wrong, and I am right. I'm looking ahead to the future. They and you are looking back to the past. England isn't always going to be divided into officers and other ranks. And those popular boys are just as important to England as Brookfield is. You have got to have them here, Chips. You can't satisfy your conscience by writing a check for a few guineas and keeping them at arm's length. Besides, they are proud of Brookfield just as you are. Years hence, maybe boys of that sort will be coming here. A few of them at any rate. Why not? Why ever not? Chips, dear, remember this is 1897, not 67, when you were up at Cambridge. You got your ideas well stuck in those days, and good ideas they were too, a lot of them, but a few, just a few chips want unsticking. Rather to her surprise, he gave way and suddenly became a keen advocate of the proposal, and the volte face was so complete that the authorities were taken unaware and found themselves consenting to the dangerous experiment. The boys from Popular arrived at Brookfield one Saturday afternoon, played soccer with the school's second team, were honorably defeated by 7 goals to 5, and later had high tea with the school team in the dining hall. They then met the head and were shown over the school, and Chip saw them off at the railway station in the evening. Everything had passed without the slightest hitch or any kind, and it was clear that the visitors were taking away with them as fine an impression as they had left behind. They took back with them also the memory of a charming woman who had met them and talked to them, for once years later, during the war, a private stationed at a big military camp near Brookfield called on Chips and said he had been one of that first visiting team. Chips gave him tea and chatted with him till at length, shaking hands, the man said, "And how is the missus, sir? I remember her very well." "Do you?" Chips answered eagerly. "Do you remember her?" "Rather, I should think anyone would." And Chips replied, they don't. You know, at least not here. Boys come and go, new faces all the time. Memories don't last. Even masters don't stay forever. Since last year, when old Gribble retired, is the school butler, there hasn't been anyone here who ever saw my wife. She died, less than a year after your visit. In 98. I'm sorry to hear that, sir. There is two or three of my pals anyhow who remember her clear as anything, though we did only see her that worst. Yes, we remember her all right. I'm very glad that was a grand day we all had, and a fine game too. One of the best days that I ever had in my life. Wish it was then and not na straight. I do. I am off to France tomorrow. A month or so later, Chips heard that he had been killed at Sachandale. End of chapter 6, read by Muhammad Afzal for second year students.